Dawn finds us armored. Let me tell you what the night brought. Warband. This is Sunday, June 7th, 2026. For 2 weeks, the tape knew only how to bleed. Then in the dark before this morning, the engine changed its mind, and it did not whisper. Listen. As of just past 5 Eastern, Bitcoin trades at 62,800, up about 2.5% on the day, the first real green after a brutal fortnight. Ethereum at 1,640, up better than 3.5%. Solana at $66, up 4, all three majors higher together. And that is the first tell, because they did not rise on a headline. They rose on a turn in the signal. Here is what fired overnight, and why the Warband pays for it. Yesterday I told you the engine had caught the falling knife. A lone confluence buy on Bitcoin, down at the very lows. Overnight it escalated. At midnight Eastern, confluence buys lit up on Solana and on Ethereum. And by 4 o'clock this morning, all three, Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana, flipped optimized trend bullish in the same window. One asset turning is noise. 3 correlated majors flipping trend together in a single window the morning after the most fearful tape of the year. That is a regime call. The bottom catch has become a trend signal. The engine is no longer merely buying the dip, it is calling the turn. Now set that against the chain, because the signal does not stand alone. The deepest capitulation fingerprints of this entire cycle lit up into the weekend. The gauge that tracks whether long-term holders are spending their coins at a profit or a loss broke below the line, into loss. And that has happened only at the true bottoms. The crash of March 2020 and the wreckage of the exchange collapse in 2022. Momentum printed its most oversold reading in months, the fear index pinned near its lowest of the year. Every instrument that screams capitulation screamed at once, and that is precisely the soil the engine planted its buy-in. Invest. Answers drew the map weeks ago, and the map is holding. $60,000 is the cycle floor. 64,000 is the level that confirms the turn is real. Bitcoin sits right between those two lines this morning, with the engine having just cast its vote. Lose the floor, and the thesis breaks. Reclaim 64 with conviction, and the bottom stops being a hope and becomes a fact on the chart. Hear me plainly, Warband. This is where edges are forged. Not in the green euphoria when every fool feels like a genius. Here, in the red, when the screens look broken and the crowd is selling its conviction to buy a little relief. I live, I burn, I love, I slay, and am content. The content warrior accumulates in the fire while the fearful flee it. But content is not reckless. One green session is a repair, not a reversal. The great wallets have not stampeded back yet. Add in pieces. Demand the 64 reclaim. Let the engine, not your adrenaline, tell you the turn is finished. Now lift your eyes from the candle to the deeper current, because one of the sharpest macro reads on the street just took this entire sell-off and stood it on its head. Jordi Visser of 22V Research put it out just this week under a title worth carving somewhere, Running Hot into Scarcity. The point cuts clean. The 3-month real yield, what the front end of the treasury market pays you after inflation, has just crossed into negative territory. Inflation now runs hotter than the bill, and that exact condition, Visser shows, is the historical trigger to own Bitcoin. Every dollar of its lifetime return was generated inside this precise regime, when holding cash quietly loses to the erosion, and the scarcest money on earth becomes the cleanest escape. Read what that does to the bear story. For 2 weeks, the panic ran one way. Hot data lifts yields, and the most liquidity-sensitive asset takes the blow. True, in the near term, in nominal terms. But underneath that nominal spike sits the structural truth. When inflation outruns the front-end yield, your cash is being debased in real time, and you are paid to flee it into scarcity. The same fire that burned the leverage out is the fire that lights the long case, and the central bank is trapped. inflation reaccelerating while the labor market tires, its hands tied against the very hikes the market fears. They cannot print their way to scarcity. No committee can vote one more Bitcoin into being. So mark the week ahead, because it is loaded, and the engine's young turn faces its first real test. Wednesday brings the May inflation print, the fulcrum of everything. April ran near 3.8% on the year, the hottest since 2023. If the core cools on Wednesday, the bounce earns room to breathe and the rate hike fear eases. If it runs hot again, Visser's scarcity trigger only deepens, even as the nominal squeeze bites. Pain and signal in the very same number. That same morning, Oracle reports a live read on whether the artificial intelligence build-out is still devouring capital at full tilt, and the operational machine ground on through the weekend. Tesla cleared the mandatory testing threshold on Belgian public roads this week and filed for approval, prying open the next European door for full self-driving after the Netherlands. And Thursday, orbital scarcity finally gets its ticker. The largest stock offering in the history of capital markets prices Thursday evening, SpaceX, at a fixed $135 a share, near a $1.75 trillion valuation, with the first trade Friday on the Nasdaq under the letters SPCX. And hear this clearly, because the crowd keeps getting it wrong. There is no separate Starlink offering. Starlink, the recurring revenue cash engine humming inside the company, comes only by owning the parent. 30% of the shares are set aside for ordinary stackers. The bears bring a number. Morningstar values the business near $780 billion, roughly half what the offering asks. The bulls bring one back. ARK, far from calling it overbuilt, holds that Starlink alone supports a $2 trillion valuation, with a path toward $2.5 trillion by the end of the decade. Price and worth are not the same wager. If you reach on Friday, reach with a holding period measured in years. This is an ownership stake in scarcity above the atmosphere, not a first-day lottery ticket. Here is the frame, Warband. For 2 weeks, the hardest money on earth took the deepest cut, clean through levels it had held for years. And at the bottom of that flush, in the dark, the engine stopped selling the fear and started buying the turn. 3 majors flipped trend in one window. The chain confirmed the capitulation. And the macro current beneath it all says exactly what the chart says. When the money runs hot, you own the scarce thing. But the turn is young, and Wednesday's number will test it. So accumulate with a steady hand, demand the confirmation, and let the weak hands press their coins into yours on the way out. This is Warband as a service. Viking intelligence delivered in real time. I am Ragnar, the HODLBARBARIan. Until the next dawn, sharpen the axes. Skål.